I really appreciate you joining us this morning. Peter James is my name. I'm the Director of Career Life Transitions. And today we're going to be talking about cascading your company values for a powerful culture. So we're running for about 35 minutes. If there's any questions or anything like that, please drop them in the chat. Charlene Williams, our admin manager, will be mediating and following through on that. So if you've got any questions or anything as we go through, please just drop it in the chat and we'll revisit that. If you've got any questions after, we'll allow a little bit of time for questions at the end. So let's get underway. Here we go. So basically the culture in your organization, I mean, is really what the culture needs to do to be successful. And that's in terms of its interactions, in terms of interaction with customers, in terms of interacting with the market and things, all the things that it needs to do from what it's learned to be successful. And I mean, if it was a person, you'd say it was their personality. It's almost what you see, what they do to solve the problems that they then, I guess, share with those people around them. And it becomes almost the observable behavior of an individual in a case, or a team, or an entire organization. So the values, therefore, start to flow out and are, I guess, a definition of the cultures, because the culture is quite complex and quite all comprehensive. But the observable, I guess, key components of it start to be defined in terms of the values. Now, we all have our own personal values, and they're the principles that help us decide what's right and wrong and how we interact with the world. In terms of the organization, it starts to become the operating principles that whoever is leading the organization would like to see in the organization. That's the ideal way of operating. What the organization needs to do to meet the expectations of the market that it's aiming towards. So I guess the interesting thing about value and culture is they're not something you choose to have or not to have. Certainly your culture will always exist. If I put a couple of people together, you know, I could look at that interaction and start to define what the interaction looks like. And I guess that becomes the culture all the way through to a group, a team, a company, a large organization. So I guess the question for leaders and especially those in HR who seem to be given the task of interacting with the people in the organization more and more, it's really, is that planned or is it just evolved anecdotally? Because I say you can't not have it. So I can either plan the culture and it'll be, and then plan to roll that out, or it'll be what it'll be. And people will interpret the problems and the situation or what gets them through, and that starts to be what the culture will become. Now, I might sit back and espouse the values of the organization and say, well, this is what my personal values are if I'm a manager of that organization. But unless I'm actively planning and developing those values, then and also creating the context where people can live those values, then the culture will overrun it. And this is where you get some disconnects. I guess if I have an organization where it's a sales organization for a moment, they're very, very focused on selling. If I talk about, well, I want to be a team, I want us to work together, but then I set up a competition where the top salesperson wins an award or gets a bonus or wins a trip somewhere, something like that. Now, what I've done there is I've created a culture because the focus will be on winning the award, because salespeople tend to be results driven in that way. So the culture I've actually developed now is flying into the face of the values I'm espousing, which is let's all work together and collaborate to be a larger team. And that is where you end up with some disconnects, and that's where you end up with, I guess, people disgruntled with it. No, I mean that is a live example. A friend of mine went into a sales role where I was told it was very, very much a team, but when she got in there, she actually found that was not the case. The actual culture had set up the sales team to be in competition with each other, which completely flew in the face of her values. So the whys and what are values and culture? Well, why is this so important? And I guess it's becoming more and more prevalent at the moment. It's certainly in the last 10, 15 years, I'm starting to see that a lot of large organizations are now separating the culture component of and the values component of the organization development component of it from even the HR component of it. But a lot of HR manager titles and whatever are now starting to change to people and culture, or people and values, things like that. So it's extremely important these days to be looking at your company and the company values and the culture. It's a very, very effective strategic advantage. If you're looking to put yourself one step ahead of your competition, having a positive, strong culture that meets the needs of the marketplace, it takes a while to develop that. So you're always going to have quite an effective strategic advantage. I guess one of the key things about culture is if it aligns with the members of the group and people feel comfortable, it meets their own personal values, which is what they're bringing to work, then they start to put in discretionary effort, which is that sense of purpose and belonging. I'm in the right place. And that really is the oil of a successful business. If people just did what their job description told them to do, you'll be closing down your business in about 10 minutes. So it's all that discretionary effort. But on the other side of it, I mean, that discretionary effort, I know people who put discretionary effort into the detriment of the organization if they feel their cultures aren't aligned, and that'll be taking time off or not getting jobs done. So it's a bit of a yin yang. There's, when you get it right, the discretionary effort really is the oil of the machine. If you get it wrong, you've now got a workforce that's actually at times working against you. Staff productivity, morale, turnover, etc. is impacted heavily by the values and culture. Good alignment means great business, and continuous improvement, that desire to be better, has its base in strong culture and values. So, I mean, I know these days the culture and values of organization and how the operation or the organization operates is one of the key factors of evaluating organizations through the stock exchange, because there really can be quite a significant swing in profitability and achievement and success of a business based on how strong the company values are. But at one stage there, if a senior executive, especially in the US where we're paying enormous sums of money for executive salaries, if a senior executive move from one organization to another, they can have an impact of up to 20% on the share value just from the fact that moved from one company to the next. Now, if you're looking at the value of a company, that is one of the reasons why some of these executives are taking home pay packets in the multi-million dollars, because imagine a company that's worth $1 billion and suddenly you attract an executive that's increased the company by $200 million just by the fact that he walks in the door or she walks in the door, then you can see how it's starting to skew things a little bit, but it also shows you the importance of focusing on culture and values. But good is average. If your team is in equilibrium, the heavy line is really where your business is sitting. But if I want to create a high-performing team and move it to great, that's what's give that circle of momentum to move forward. So great teams provide forward momentum. They're always looking for that continuous improvement. And moving your team, as the Good to Great book talks about, is saying, well, good is just average, and that's our balance of the bell curve of our people. If I'm really starting to focus on building a high performance team through culture and values, I'm going to shift that bell curve to the right, which is going to give that circle momentum to move forward. I mean, you've all seen this model before. The core basis of high performing team, but operates with equal concern for people as a concern for results. And your management and leadership, and we strongly differentiate between management and leadership. Management really is about the policies, procedures, it's about KPIs, it's about measurement, it's about all those things that almost can sit on a spreadsheet you can work through. So it's about getting the job done. Whereas leadership is now adding interpersonal relationship with that, where now I'm eliciting people with that discretionary effort and making them feel like they really enjoy being at work. And once people feel engaged and motivated, then you're going to get a lot higher productivity out of them. And from that, that's where you're getting your high performance teams. I guess we're focused a long time just on making sure we get management absolutely right. But really taking the time, and I guess this is where we're doing a lot of work at the moment, is actually taking the time to develop those interpersonal skills. And in these current times of very scarce resources, people are hard to find, they're hard to keep. Certainly our business, CLT, is really starting to focus on developing leadership skills. In other words, focusing on those interpersonal skills, because businesses are starting to realize that that's what keeps people in the business. The work is the work is the work, and we can develop that and train people and give them that opportunity to be their best in terms of their work. But a massive component of why someone is attracted to a company or stays with a company is based on the culture and values. And the culture and values is very, very much in the hands of the leadership or the senior management team or senior leadership team. So getting that right makes a lot of sense when resources are quite hard to come by at the moment. I want to not only attract really good people who want to work for a company where they feel they fit and are productive and developing themselves, as well as retaining people in the business. So certainly a lot of conversations we're having around career is people-based, senior people, middle management, senior people come to us and say, that doesn't quite feel right. You know, I'm in this organization and I love the work I'm doing. I love my team, but it's just heading in a direction I don't feel comfortable with. Well, that's starting to be a misalignment between values and culture. Okay, so where does it go wrong? This is one of my favorite cartoons. I want to make sure my project plan is consistent with our company culture, but I don't know what our culture is. Maybe you could describe it. The boss says, well, maybe something about honesty. And Gilbert says, no, I would have noticed that by now. I guess that's what it's all about, is what are your leaders demonstrating? What am I looking at? And does that align with what I'm seeing and what you're saying? And that's the key to culture. Sadly, most value statements you see on the wall are bland, toothless, or just plain dishonest. And rather than being harmless, as some executives assume, or even as a tool for marketing, where the marketing departments come in and pull together a group of values and what have you, and then proclaim them to the marketplace. When the staff see that and there's that disconnect, the empty value statements, it can create cynical and dispirited employees. And as it said, it can often be harmful rather than harmless, and often highly destructive. And it can alienate your customer base. I mean, the number of times an organization talks about its brand, and let's face it, brand, values, culture, they're all starting to come into the mix. When you go into an organization, you believe the brand is this, but when your interactions with them show you that they're not like that, that creates cognitive dissonance for you, and it's likely you'll escape from that situation. So really, I guess what we talk about in businesses is if you're not willing to accept the time, effort, and focus that instilling good, strong values in the business requires, then really be careful about going to the trouble of formulating those value statements, because they are not harmless. They will have an effect. I mean, I remember working in an organization that went out and asked all the staff what development needs they required. When all the answers came back, they had a look at their budget and thought, well, actually, we don't have the budget for that. And it actually created more trouble than it was worth. They thought they were doing the right thing by asking people about what their training and development needs were, but they actually put the spotlight on that being an issue. And when they did nothing about it, it actually created a negative for the business. So you need to be quite careful the road you tread. So when values don't align, it does start to create some issues. And as I said to you, at the moment where there's so much complexity going on and mergers and you name it in the workplace, with a lack of strong leadership and strong support for the employees of the organization, you can end up with individual symptoms of anxiety, frustration, retardation of development, rejection of the environment, people refusing to participate and withdrawal. And these then flow into equivalent symptoms in the organization: reduced morale, reduced productivity, reduced motivation, decreased conflict, absenteeism, and increased turnover. Okay. Now, the individual symptoms and the individual behaviors start to flow through, and you're finding yourself, I guess, when these negatives start to flow in, and it's kind of interesting talking to people, which I've noticed recently, and I wrote a little article on it online. If you're looking at our blogs online, really, when the values start to kind of separate a little bit from individual to the business, they start to look back on the actual work they're doing as well. So you're getting this kind of domino effect where you're sitting at a business, you're looking around thinking, well, my values, and when I say the values don't align, I'm in no way suggesting it's values in terms of dishonesty or anything like that. What I'm saying is that the values don't align in terms of just the basics. Is this organization focused on quality, or is it focused on sales, or is it focused on productivity? Is it focused on innovation? I mean, if my headspace is in sales is where I really see the organization going and the values, and suddenly you have a change of CEO, and now we've moved into innovation, or we've moved into quality or safety, then you end up with, it's not that the values are wrong, they just don't align with me. And once I start to feel like the values don't align, I start to look at my work and think, okay, the things I don't like about the technical aspect of my job start to expand. And we're talking to executives are saying it starts with that. It starts with, well, we're not quite aligned where I expected the values and the culture to go. And now I'm looking at my job and thinking, well, there's some aspects of my job I don't like, and they are now starting to feel like they're taking over. And that's the first step before someone actually looks at moving on or resigning from their organization. So there are a variety of company values, and you've got to ask yourself, what are yours based on? Are they actually the core values, the deep ingrained principles, or are they accidental values, as I was saying? They're the spontaneous ones that just sort of happened as you pulled the organization together? Or are they the aspirational values, the things that you want the organization to look like, but you're not quite there yet? Or are they just permission to play values, just the minimum behavioral and social standards you require of people coming in? I guess the core values are the key to it, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, working with another quite large company, the people who were knew the original owners quite well were very, very strong. It's a very, very family-based, strong values-based organization. But as the organization grew and grew and grew, and layers of the management team had no contact directly with the owners, the values started to water down. Now you've got people who knew what the owner was like and knew what the strong values are, looking at the rest of the organization. It's almost growing out of their control. The values are just the accidental values, because they didn't really sort of sit down and take the time to say, well, we are the custodians of the value from the owners of the business, and we need to be able to take the time and effort to actually pass them on to new people coming into the business. If you don't do that, you will just end up with, as I said before, the accidental values of people doing the best they can. Now, it's not to say that that's wrong, but does it align with what you're looking to achieve? Here's just one basic values framework, if you like, that it's a competitive values framework, and you look this up online. It talks about it in a matrix, which is all very, very popular in consulting. But whether an organization has flexibility and discretion and internal focus and integration, well, that's a clan-like culture, and that focusing on doing things together. The kind of your Googles. You had adhocracy, which is doing things first. That's where it's flexibility, discretion, and external focus. In other words, getting up there. And there you're disruptors. Where you have external focus, the differentiation about stability and control, you're talking about your banks. They're competing against each other and getting the job done. All the way through a hierarchy, which has internal focus and wants stability and control, you're looking at government, and they are focused on doing the right things. So if you have a mix of this, if you are coming out of a mindset and an organization, or just a personal mindset of doing things first, and I drop you into a hierarchy culture, even if I've attracted you into that, and you're now got a disconnect, because doing the right things and doing things first require a whole different mindset. And you can see at different times the government has turned around and said, well, we want to be innovative, we want to be market driven, we want to attract people. So they'll attract people into a government organization to say, we want to be this way. But the way the whole structure of the organization is set up doesn't allow for it to happen that easily. So you get these kind of bursts of people kind of looking across the fence at someone else's culture and say, that would be great if we had that. Could we bring it into our, and they attract people for a short amount of time, and those people tend to leave and we go back to the status quo. It does take a lot of effort, and it's a structural, cultural effort that needs to be focused on if you're looking for that, that significant change. And this is where you see some of these huge cultural change programs going in, which can take 3 to 5 years to roll out. But people are complex. We're the same. We have personal values, we have moral values, we have our social cultural values, we have our psychological values, we have our spiritual values, we have our family values. And I guess when I join an organization, some of those they're negotiable to a certain extent. Once again, nothing I'm talking about here is in the negative or bad. I'm just saying, yeah, okay, you do things that way here. I'm happy to fit in. So I'm negotiable with that. When these things become non-negotiable, that's when you're starting to have a disconnect. Now, if someone has a non-negotiable value that is being compromised in some way in an organization, but they feel they can't leave the organization, that's when you start to have a dispirited employee and someone that is not really adding value to the organization. And we end up with people who are working, they feel they've got no choice to be in the organization, and they're pretty much doing the minimum, and they're just not happy at work. And that's not what you want if you're trying to build a highly productive organization and build a high performance team. So what is the path to align at effective values and creating that culture within your organization? Well, it's kind of an interesting one. Your organizational culture is based on a combination of these things. And I've seen each of the areas of either the employees or the management or marketing can actually start to massively impact on your the culture of the organization. I mean, I've seen I worked for one organization where the storeman had a massive impact on the employees, working for organization where middle management are almost the filters between senior management and the employees, and they're starting to drive the culture. Or the marketplace. I mean, I've worked with organizations where the large organization which you may be contracting to is starting to tell you how you should be running your business. But the multiplying factor in this is always going to be leadership. And the leadership is being able to develop your culture and develop the values. So you may be flexible and interact and interface with the marketplace, because ultimately it's the market you're trying to meet. But you are taking control of your culture. You're not letting the employees take control of it, or management or your stakeholders or the market drive your culture independent of you. At least you have some impact on it, and strong leadership will have the most impact on the culture of the organization. A lot of leaders I speak to are quite surprised by the impact they have on the organization. So people are looking to leaders, what they say, how they say it, what they censure, what they ignore, things like that. And you'll be surprised what an impact that actually has on the broader team or organization. So you're looking for that alignment between the company, the society, the social peers, the leadership, and people in the organization, all based around the marketplace you're trying to enter into. Because ultimately, if you're running a business, it is there to provide services to your market, but it all needs to be aligned. So, I mean, culture is that external responsiveness to the marketplace, gather and use valid data. And what's going on in the business is the belief mindset espouse values of the business, the beliefs, values, expectation. There's a subjective thing. So you have the organizational subjective, which is you espouse values, your individual subjective, in other words, the beliefs of me and values of my expectations. Then you have the organizational objective, which is your process, policies, roles, and all that does have an impact on the culture. And then the individual objectives, in other words, the skills, aptitude, knowledge they bring. All that needs to be massaged into a fit for purpose outcome, which you're looking to create adaptability and sustainability. So it's that ability. And once I'm had this balance right, then I do become quite an adaptable and sustainable organization. And it provides, looking in that culture, it's providing a shared meaning and that internal connectedness with people. And this is what pulls together a strong culture that is fit for purpose in the marketplace you're addressing. So the key elements of culture is operationalized values. And by operationalized values, I mean, if we say communication is the most important thing here, well, what are we doing that someone from outside could look in and say, yes, I see that you say your values are around communications, and I see the steps you take to make that happen. That our policies and procedures and what have you aren't flying in the face of the values of the culture. I mean, at one stage there, as safety culture started to come in, there was all the policies and procedures around safety. But if I'm not actually changing the mindset of the individual, then I've got a disconnect there. There are always the rituals and ceremonies that you have in an organization, and some of those are important, but the rituals and ceremonies that you have also start to guide the culture. So how do we have private offices? Do we have an open space? Do we have a shared space? Does the senior management have its own lunchroom? Do they have private parking? Do we celebrate birthdays? Do we celebrate sales wins? Those kind of things are all the rituals and ceremonies that start to describe your company. And then a really important aspect of it, the story that you tell, the history, the myths and the heroes, because whenever, even just working for this company I was telling you about before, where the owner is no longer directly involved in it, but you have that element of people. How do they talk about how the owner espouse the values? Well, they tell the stories. They tell the stories of where that has worked for them and how committed they were and where it fitted in the environment, because storytelling is very, very important in managing culture. And then there's all the symbols and the signs and the metaphors and the slogans and what have you that you see around the place, including that value statement that may be in the reception area. So when we talk about change in culture and core values, the key points is take the time to understand your actual current values and culture. And I guess saying you want something different or you don't like it or you don't feel things are right around here are not the same as actually understanding and creating some kind of a gap analysis as to where we actually are. So are you clear about what culture you want? That's the next stage of it. Do we understand where we're actually at and what has created that? And do we understand where we want to go with that? Do we have clear core values and have we made those clear to those around us? Have we evaluated our leaders and managers' skills to develop those behavioral competencies? And as I say, this is where we're certainly working with a number of companies at the moment, that those behavioral competencies in terms of developing leadership skills, which really drives the culture and values in the organization, are not as developed as they could be in a lot of managers. We're looking for that values alignment in everything. In other words, you can't be discretionary as to where you apply the values and where you don't. It needs to be across the board. You can't say people are our most important asset and then do a redundancy or cut salary or whatever it is in certain areas of the business and say, well, you know, that we needed to do that just to look after this little bit of the business. That doesn't fit. Don't make assumptions about people's understanding. I mean, no change effort ever failed from over communicating. Reward compliance and direct or correct direction address corrections without exception. And that certainly a lot of organizations now, before they embark on any kind of large cultural change, the leadership team need to get together and really understand without compromise and exception what they're going to do and how they're going to behave to lead that change, because that is what impacts. I mean, I've seen many large organizations start to go through a change where the senior person in the organization is very, very clear as to what they've got, but it hasn't really got the next layer on board. And once you get the director of this or the director of that thinking to themselves, you know, I don't really agree with this, I'm not really going to get on board with it, then you can pretty much write off a change opportunity in their particular area. Be prepared to lose people. Not everyone's going to come along for the journey. As I said to you, it's not whether the values have changed to be right or wrong, it's the values have changed to meet the marketplace and meet where you need to go. And if that requires a change in the way the culture is espoused in the business, or what the culture needs to be to meet the needs of the business or the marketplace, then you will have people who join the company thinking it was something else, or grew up in a business where it was something else. And even sometimes I've seen organizations where they've had to let some of the old guard go, because the old guard was actually holding the organization back into a culture that sometimes was 30 or 40 years in the past. Record and tell the stories supporting the values. Talk about the heroes. Talk about the successes in the business, and stick at it. Changes and values don't happen overnight. So this is our values cascade model, really. How we work together, that we're committing to behaviors, we're aligning behaviors to organizational values, and we're holding people accountable. They're the things that go up to make values cascade. So you're actually now looking at the culture of the organization, and you're looking at it in terms of what it needs to be. And then you're taking the key elements of that and saying, all right, well, these are the key values that support the culture, or that are summarizing the culture of your life. Then you're looking at it and saying, all right, how do I turn them into observable and measurable behaviors in the organization that aligns to each area of the business? So sometimes you may need to cascade the values in a slightly different way, because blanket value statements across organizations just don't really fit. Doing some work with a large hospital at the moment, I mean, what the translation of the values of the hospital for the oncology department are going to be completely different to the finance department or the accounts department. So although I may say that I want clear and open communication, or I want innovation, the definition of that in the oncology was completely different to the definition of that in the accounts department, although the intent of the values needed to be held true. So start with your vision, and then think about your intervention strategies, team building, skill development, what have you, and especially developing leadership skills so that your leadership or your management team are becoming a leadership team that are walking the talk. Create accountability and responsibility. Hiring the right people is really important. Sort of saying, well, we would like a culture that's an adhocracy where, you know, people are getting their right, and putting them into a cultural environment which is not that way isn't going to fit. That person won't stay unless they unless they're given an enormous amount of power to make the changes they want to make, which is so unlikely. It's almost not possible. You really start to need, if you're going to hire the right people, you need to hire a group of people that have the power to make those changes if you're truly interested in changing the culture of the organization. That you do need external consultants. It's not a matter of just loading up, and I've seen some organizations try to do this, just start to load up on the HR department or the OD department, the aspects of changing a culture. It's just too much work. And there are ways of shortcutting that by bringing in some external expertise. You need that visible commitment from top leaders in the organization, and you need the resources. As I say, it takes time and money. But, you know, if you're looking at a situation where you need to start addressing this, I can tell you, if you leave it too late, you're going to spend an awful lot more time, effort, and money on trying to rescue an organization rather than develop an organization. And I mean, Charles Handy talked about his curve as to that reinvention curve. Most organizations leave it till it goes over the top of the lip and is heading down the wrong way. Then they start looking at, well, why we have a problem here. You want to be reinventing yourself at the top of the curve to move you on to the next thing. You know, what got you here is not going to get you there is one of the other sayings. So in summary, values initiatives have nothing to do with building consensus. They're about imposing a set of fundamental strategic sound beliefs on a broad group of people, and it's based on the values of the organization. So in other words, I can engage people in that conversation, but if I'm meeting the needs in the marketplace, it can't be consensus. It needs to be solid, fundamental, and strategic. And then I'm engaging and employing people to meet that. Given all the hard work that goes into to implementing these value systems and what have you, a lot of companies prefer not to bother. So you need to really think about, is this where I want to go? Is this what I need? Because I've seen organizations start to try and roll out culture change and what have you and get a little bit into it and think, oh, this is too hard. It actually does more damage than good. Make no mistake, living by stated corporate values is difficult. It causes you to have to make decisions. And as I say, it's not whether a decision is this is right and this is wrong. The decisions start to be, I've got two options here. What do I stand by? Now, if your organization is driven by shareholder value and you're turning around to everyone saying people are our most important asset, and let's say it's something fundamentally bad happens to the organization, do I look after shareholder value, or do I continue to say people are our most important asset and we look after our people? They're the kind of decisions that start to become really, really challenging. And I do remember a story, I think it was the Gore-Tex factory, it might have been in Massachusetts, and it basically burnt down, and it was owned by a single family. And the family paid the wages of everybody in the organization until the factory was rebuilt, and they had such a strong, fantastic culture. But if you put that onto the stock market and said, all right, this is a decision about shareholder wealth, all right, well, maybe you might say, well, I'm sorry, factory burnt down, we're rebuilding it, and you're on your own, and we'll employ you back in the future at some stage. They're the kind of really difficult decisions that people and organizations will need to make. Political correctness pressures, those kind of things. So you need to really think seriously about what you put out there, because that's the expectation that the market, your stakeholders, the employees expect of you. But if you're willing to devote your time and energy to creating that authentic values, there's a good chance that your company will be set up and be in a position to create and sustain a major strategic advantage. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session. Now, Charlene, do we have any questions at this stage from anybody?
At this stage, we don't have any questions, but I have popped it in the chat. If anybody does have any questions, to let me know, and I can ask them to you.
As I say, we're working with a number of companies around the place. Louise has come back, thank you. And certainly give us a call. We're more than happy to come out and have a chat about your current situation, or your where you're at, or the company values, culture, that type of thing, and even the leadership structure in the organization. More than happy to have that chat. So drop us a line. There's a lot of material we put online through their blogs, website, and what have you, and on LinkedIn. So please feel free. There's something there we can support you with. More than happy to start that conversation. So on that note, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're just about on time. If there's no more questions, we'll leave it at that and look forward to seeing you soon. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.